And the way the presentation will work is Simon here from Manta Trust will do the presentation. And if you have any questions, you're going to type it in the chat area. And then after he finishes the presentation, I'll go ahead and read the questions to him from there. Okay. Shall we give it just a few more minutes to make sure people have time to sign on? I hope you have your coffee or beverage of choice. So while we're waiting to start, Simon, how long have you been with Manta Trust?
I've been with the charity since towards the end of 2016, so about 4 years now. Yeah, I started off as a volunteer out there in the Maldives, and then took over the research officer kind of side of things for a couple of years over there. And now I run the digital media and communications for the kind of wider charity, the Manta Trust, and been in this role for a year and a half now. Yeah.
Very nice. It looks like my internet connection is unstable, it's telling me. Are you a scuba diver?
Yes, yeah, I am. I was a dive instructor. I learned to scuba dive from a really young age, and I became a dive instructor about a week after turning 18, and then quite quickly decided that I enjoyed the teaching side of things, but I was much more interested in the animals and the biology and the conservation side of things. So I did a degree in marine biology and have been working in sort of the conservation field since then. But yeah, I still do a lot of diving, just not any teaching anymore.
Nice, very nice. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? And all panelists. We can start sharing. Okay. Carlos, are we set up so that Simon can share his screen?
Yes, we should be.
Yeah, I've got a little button down here, so I'll go ahead and get the presentation up.
So he's going to share his screen. If everybody will put their questions in the chat, do it as soon as you, if you're like me, you're going to forget if you wait. So just type in your question the minute you have one, and we'll get going.
Cool. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. We'll get cracking then. So yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on this afternoon to talk about manta rays and the Manta Trust and the kind of work we're doing. I love talking about these animals, and hopefully this will inspire some of you to go out and find some mantas, and yeah, we'll get started. So this presentation, I'll quickly go over who the Manta Trust are and then a bit about manta biology and conservation side of things. So the Manta Trust, we're a UK and US registered charity. And our goal is basically a sustainable future for the oceans where manta rays and their relatives thrive in healthy, diverse marine ecosystems. We're quite a wide, diverse group of individuals. We've got marine biologists and underwater photographers and policymakers and educators and dive instructors and all sorts of different people. But the one sort of underlying theme between all of us is our love for manta rays and marine conservation. The Manta Trust was formed in 2011 after about 6 years of working in the Maldives under the Maldivian Manta Ray Project. Dr. Guy Stevens founded the Manta Trust as basically an umbrella charity. So we're UK and US registered, and we've expanded to have affiliate projects all around the world. I think we've got over 25 different affiliate projects around the world. So they're all run and owned, I guess, by individuals in those countries, but they become an affiliate and they both basically fall under the Manta Trust umbrella. We help them with funding, with sharing expertise and sort of collaborating within this network of the Manta Trust. And that's led us to be one of the leading authorities on manta ray research. So if people are interested in knowing about mantas or doing studies on them or whatever, often they'll come to us. Yeah, that's kind of who we are. And moving on basically to the more interesting stuff about manta rays and their biology and conservation. Manta rays are what are referred to as cartilaginous elasmobranch fish, which is quite a mouthful. But if we break that down, elasmobranch means metal plate gills. So they're the gills that the mantas are breathing through, similar to sharks. All fish breathe through gills, but most of those have basically a covering, so you can't see the gills. But with sharks and rays, they are exposed. Branchia, yeah, so elasmobranchia, metal plate gills, and cartilaginous is referring to the skeleton. So the skeleton of a shark and a ray is made up of cartilage, similar to our nose and our ears. It's a bit more sort of flexible and malleable, and enables their body to sort of move slightly differently. One of the issues with cartilage, though, is it doesn't fossilize anywhere near as well as hard bone, like our bones. Which means fossil records for sharks and rays are not as good, basically. It's harder to preserve them. Sharks evolved about 370 million years ago, so they've been around for millions of years. Manta rays evolved a fair bit more recently, only about 20 million years ago. I think many of you are scuba divers, and I'm sure you've spent a lot of time in the water already, so I'm sure you will have come across a whole plethora of different rays. There's all sorts of different shapes and sizes. We've got ones with circular discs, diamond shapes, one that swim on the bottom, in the water column, all sorts of different variations, different colors as well. But yeah, the majority of them are what we call bottom dwelling. So they're looking for food in the sand in the bottom. One group of rays evolved and moved off the seafloor into the water column, and they're what we call the mobulid family. So there's 10 species at the moment. That number is kind of chopping and changing, different genetic studies refuting different species, and yeah, it's all a bit messy. But Manta Trust, we believe there are 10 species. 2 of those species are manta rays, but to make things complicated, they now fall under the mobulid family, and 8 species of mobular rays. The way we can tell the difference between mantas and mobulas, manta rays, first of all, their size, they're much bigger than all the mobulid species. So most of the mobulids are around a meter and a half, something like that. Whereas, so that's 3 to 5 feet-ish. Manta rays are much bigger, sort of 3.5 to 7 meters. So we're talking 10, 12 feet up to about 20 feet. So yeah, much bigger individuals. Markings, manta rays have unique spot patterns and sort of distinguishing markings, which I'll talk about a bit more in a second. And also their mouth. So on a manta ray, the mouth is what we call terminal. So it's right at the end of the head. So if it's swimming towards you, you'll see that head like right in front of you. It's at the very, very front of the animal. With the mobular rays, the mouth is tucked under the chin a little bit. If you can see on this image on the right-hand side, you can see the mouth is a little bit sort of underneath the chin, so it's not right at the very front of the animal. The 2 species of manta ray, we've got the resident reef manta ray and then the oceanic manta. Similarities and differences between them, we can tell them apart from the top of the animal. In the reef mantas, this sort of black shading makes a kind of a Y shape, whereas on the oceanic mantas, it's much more of an abrupt T. It's very distinct, it's very black and white, whereas the reef manta kind of shades from black into white. On the underside, on the ventral side of the animal, reef manta rays, have spots very often between the gill slits, so in kind of the chest area of the individual, whereas the oceanic manta rays are nearly always void of spots in their chest, but have the spot pattern mostly sort of clustered around the abdomen, more of the belly region, so a bit further down the body. They also vary in sort of habitat use. So reef mantas, kind of as the name suggests, are resident on coral reefs, whereas the oceanic mantas live more in pelagic waters out in the open ocean, which means for scuba divers, often in many countries around the world, it's more likely that you'll come across reef mantas because obviously you're diving on a coral reef. You're not, very rarely are you out in the blue just kind of floating around. These 2 maps quickly show the sort of distribution around the world of these 2 species. So the dark areas on both maps are where they have specifically been found, so 100% guaranteed. And then the shaded area is kind of the perceived habitat range of the individuals. So you'll notice in the Atlantic Ocean, there are no reef manta rays. They sort of come across as far as Hawaii in the Pacific, but then not up to the Pacific coast of the Americas or in the Atlantic Ocean. Just to go over what a manta ray is, so if we sort of break the animal down, at the very front of the animal, at the head, we've got two cephalic fins. Okay, so cephalic means head, so they're fins from the head. And they can roll them up in sort of like the image on the right-hand side. And that's often where they get their kind of name, the devil rays, because it looks like two horns. Then we've got the eyes on the side of the head. Many people think that the eyes are like at the end of these cephalic fins. That's not true. They're a bit further back. They're on the side. That gives them real good field of view around them, to the side, above them, but it leaves a blind spot directly behind, which will be important in a second. Moving back, we've got the two pectoral fins, so the sort of big wings that they're using to swim or to fly almost through the water. Towards the back of the animal, we've got a little dorsal fin, so just like a great white shark, the classic fin cutting through the water. Manta rays do have a dorsal fin, but it's really small. If we look on the underside of the animal, we've got 5 pairs of gill slits, which the animal uses to breathe and sort of for filtering out food. And towards the back of the animal, we've got the pelvic fins and a tail, which I'll show you some close-up photos of in a second. Manta rays are completely harmless. They do have a small row of really tiny teeth on the bottom lip here. So you can see this little black streak is it's like sandpapery teeth, basically. But they don't use them for hunting or for defense or anything like that. And there is no stinging barb on the tail. So stingrays and eagle rays and stuff like that, they have stinging barbs on the tail. Manta rays, they don't have any of that. So their defensive system is basically their size. They're just really big, and then that makes them quite safe from predators. I mentioned quickly about spot patterns. So each and every manta ray is born with a unique spot pattern. And these patterns never change throughout their lifetime. So just as a human, we can track and trace who we are based off our fingerprints, and police know who we are and where we've been from our fingerprints. Biologists can track and trace manta rays using their spot patterns. Yeah, so we've got an oceanic manta on the left and a reef manta on the right. The one on the right is our most spotty manta ray in the Maldives, absolutely covered in spots, and his name is aptly named Mr. Spotty. Some variations along the bottom there, but some of them are really quite similar, but you will find differences, and that's what we can use to basically photograph them and figure out who each individual is. Color morphs, so we get a whole variety of ranges of manta colorations, I guess. Starting from the left-hand side, we've got leucistic, so very pale, very white individuals. In the center, what we call chevron, which is the most common manta in most places. And then on the right-hand side, we've got black morphs or melanistic manta rays. So really quite a varied spectrum. And it's basically the amount of skin pigmentation that's expressed determines what sort of color it is, essentially. These are all reef manta rays, and exactly the same for the oceanic manta rays. So again, leucistic, chevron, over to black morph. These black morph ones here in the middle, I've never seen one like this, but that's like, yeah, I think they're the most beautiful mantas. They're so cool. And then some of you might have seen maybe a year ago now, actually, a pink manta ray. This went around social media and kind of all the news and stuff about a year ago. This individual is, I think, from Lady Elliot Island. It's named Inspector Clouseau, I think, and it's the only pink manta that known to science. And it's basically, again, it's a variation in skin pigmentation that makes it a pink individual. But quite neat little factoid. Despite their huge size, manta rays actually feed on some of the tiniest things in the water. So what we call zooplankton, smaller than a grain of rice. All sorts of different types of zooplankton around the world, but some of the most common ones they feed on are copepods, mysid shrimps, arrowworms, stuff like that. So really, really small plankton. And they swim around with their mouth wide open, using those cephalic fins as a funnel to basically push extra water into their mouth. and then they filter that water out through their gills, through the gill plates, and it passes through this gill filament, which basically traps or creates these little vortices which push the plankton back towards the back of the throat. And once they've built up enough of a kind of ball of food in their mouth, they'll then swallow that into the digestive tract. Manta rays, they exhibit a whole range of different feeding methods. I think I've got some videos. I hope these will play for you guys. We've got somersault feeding. So the manta ray basically does these backflips in the water. If there's a really concentrated area of food, it will just sort of backflip in round and round in this one spot. And we've got surface feeding. Let me try and get that. Play again. So when the plankton is really concentrated on the surface, the manta will skim really close to the top of the water and just, yeah, basically feed on that very top layer of plankton in the water column. So that's kind of individual feeding. Manta rays do come together though, and they start to feed in pairs, which we call piggyback feeding. This is quite cute. One manta will position itself right on top of the other, and they'll basically swim in unison, and any food that the first manta ray, the bottom manta ray, misses kind of gets pushed over the top of its head, and then the manta ray situated just on its back will be able to utilize that and feed on the food that the first manta missed. In some areas around the world, we start to get bigger and bigger aggregations of manta rays, and we start to see chain feeding. So I think I've got a video in a second. But basically the mantas will follow each other in a line, and they'll be normally going up a current streak or where the plankton's pushed up against a reef. And they'll basically feed up and down in this line, following one another. And then we get mass feeding, which is when we get really large aggregations of mantas, and sometimes they'll start to basically follow each other around and create a cyclone, and it makes almost like a vortex of water, which kind of concentrates the plankton, and then the mantas can then swim up and feed more effectively. So they're kind of working together almost, and it's collaborative feeding, which shows quite a high level of intelligence really for a fish. So here's the chain feeding. So on the left-hand side, we've got the reef, and then they're out in the blue, and the manta rays are sort of swimming up this reef. And then they'll get to a point, this is sped up a little bit, but they turn around and they all follow each other back the other way. A couple of them kind of jumping in the queue. And they'll just go up and down that reef for a few hours until the tide changes and starts to disperse that plankton. Cool. Manta spas. So if you're a diver, this is almost certainly where you're going to be looking for manta rays, on a cleaning station. So it's where mantas come to basically get picked clean of parasites, of dead skin, if they've got any injuries or anything like that. And they're working together with little cleaner fish. So there's these species of fish that live on the reef, and their role in the ecosystem is to basically clean other animals. So turtles, sharks, all sorts of fish and manta rays, they visit these cleaning stations to get kind of a spa treatment. It's a symbiotic relationship, which is mutually beneficial. So the fish, they get their little bit of food and nutrition, and the manta rays get rid of all the dead skin, any food that's stuck in the gills, or any injuries, they sort of get wounds, they get picked clean. So again, I think there's a video here. So the manta ray won't be interested on eating these little fish. They're not in their sort of diet. Manta rays are negatively buoyant, so they need to keep swimming, they need to keep flapping their wings, or they will start to sink and sort of crash into the reef. And the cleaner fish, they sort of pick away at stuff on the back of the animal. You'll see some of them swimming into the gills, into the mouth and stuff as well. So yeah, these are normally on cleaning stations, and they're sort of set areas of reef that basically host these cleaner fish. And that makes it quite easy for scuba divers. As soon as you know where that site is, you just return to that dive site, and there's a good chance that you'll find mantas if you go at the right time. Manta rays do have natural predators. There are a number of species that are known to hunt and target manta rays. Normally, they'll be after the juvenile manta rays, because as soon as they get bigger, they're kind of too big to prey upon. But tiger sharks, orcas or killer whales, and great hammerheads are known to predate on mantas. I mentioned about the eyes, and that gives them good field of view, but it leaves a blind spot directly behind them. And that's very often where we see the shark attacks come from. And as a result, they kind of get one bite out of the manta, and that's normally about it, we think. So that's an example of a shark bite on a manta. Pretty impressive. There's not much in terms of internal organs going on towards the back of the body there. So an injury like that, most of the time we think that these animals can survive that. We see a lot of manta rays with injuries like this, and they heal and they recover and they're fine. It's hard to know how many actually die from natural predation because, again, they sort of sink and then animals will start to scavenge it and it will be gone quite quickly. Mantas do have a pretty unique healing ability though. I don't think I need to point out where the shark bite is on this individual, but our team saw the same individual about a year later, and this is what the individual looked like. So you can see these 3 spots here, they're the same 3 spots here, little nick in the wing there, same there. These 2 spots would be under this remora, but it's hidden. And you can see the outline of where that injury used to be. So it's almost completely sort of closed over that wound, and yeah, essentially regenerated almost, and yeah, really quite impressive. And just in a year as well. Manta rays, like us, they're sort of females and males. So this is how we can tell the difference between the 2 genders. In males, or sorry, the females on the left-hand side, well, all manta rays, they've got these 2 pelvic fins. Where's my mouse? So 2 little pelvic fins towards the tail. The males have those pelvic fins as well, but they also have these 2 rod-shaped structures, which are called claspers. So they're the male reproductive organ. And in a juvenile or immature males, those claspers will be really quite small. And as they reach sexual maturity, those claspers will elongate and extend past the end of the pelvic fins, and they will calcify and they'll become like more solid and more rigid. Telling the difference between a immature male and a female from the top is really hard to do because those those claspers are underneath. But if you can get underneath the animal, so these photos are all looking up at the animal, it's much easier to tell whether or not there are claspers, and therefore whether or not it's a female or a male. The females grow a little bit bigger than the males, up to about 3.5 meters in wingspan for reef manta rays. And that's because they need to carry a pup inside. The larger the pup is at birth, the better chances it has of survival. So the bigger the female is to give birth to a bigger pup, the better chance the sort of whole population has. So the males grow up to about 3 meters, about 1/2 meter, 1.5 feet, 2 feet, smaller in wingspan than the females. Courtship and mating. Again, this often happens around cleaning stations. And what we believe to happen is basically the females release kind of a pheromone or a scent into the water, which the males pick up on and start to get quite excited about. And they start to chase the female around in these courtship trains. And it's kind of a test of fitness and strength. Whoever's the strongest, most suited male wins the right to mate with the female, essentially. And these courtship trains can go on for a few hours, even up to a day or 2. And they vary in intensity. So there we go, a little video here. So the female manta at the front, she's got reproductive wounds and no claspers there, so we know that she's a female. And then behind her, we've got a male with 2 claspers there between the pelvic fins. Another male, another male, another male. So a whole horde of male mantas following after. And then there's more mantas coming. These are all males as well, but they're way back in the courtship train, so probably don't stand much chance this time around. After these elaborate sort of courtship trains, we then get copulation. So the male and the female manta will come together. The male manta will bite onto the left-hand pectoral fin, sorry, the wing. Almost always the left-hand side, just kind of one of those things. We'll roll around underneath the female to insert the claspers into the cloaca. I think there's video here of manta reproduction. Quite a blurry video, I'm afraid, but I think we'll kind of get the idea. These examples of courtship, and courtship is seen relatively frequently, but reproduction like this is very rarely seen. So it's really quite a unique insight into reproduction of manta rays. So here the male and the female are basically intertwined. Again, lots of other manta activity around. All these mantas really quite excited about what's going on. So that's kind of, we think the sort of pheromones in the water column and kind of the energy being passed off between one another, all really excited. And just like that, it's finished. So yeah, really, really awesome clip. That was just filmed by, I think, a member of the public, a scuba diver. Incredibly lucky to witness that. I've been researching mantas and diving with them in many countries around the world. I've seen a fair bit of courtship behavior, but I've never seen reproduction like that. So really, really cool. And as a result, we get pregnant females. So these individuals are all pregnant. We can tell by the really big bulge on the belly and on the back. A female gives birth to just a single pup, and that pup is born between 1.5, 1.7, 1.8 meters. So I guess 6, 7 feet, something like that in wingspan. The pup is fully independent, so it's born and it's basically off to live its own life. And it's a 12.5-month gestation period. From the reproduction on the left-hand side of the wing, we'll see these mating scars. So these black marks on the female's wingtip. And that's how we can tell whether a female manta ray is sexually mature and has reproduced in the past. We can tell with these mating scars. And really interesting to note, manta rays giving birth has never been recorded in the wild. I think there's 2 or 3 videos of an individual giving birth in an aquarium in Japan, I think Okinawa maybe. I think it's actually the same individual giving birth a couple of times over a period. But nobody's ever filmed it or seen it in the wild. So we don't really know where they go to give birth. Is it in deep water? Is it at nighttime? Where is it? It's probably not on shallow coral reefs during the daytime, because if you think of how many divers are out there diving and nobody's come across it, everyone's got GoPro these days, you'd have thought there would be a video on YouTube, but not yet. We do see lots of really small young manta rays, so what we call young of the year. The manta rays, they're born, or when they're inside the female, the wings are sort of folded over the body into a kind of little manta burrito. And when they're born, they have these like crease marks along the wings, and then also the spots are really dull, fin creases and sort of red coloration, faded spots. And then as that individual matures, those sort of spots start to come through a little bit more and become more pronounced. And there you go, you can see that's the same individual. Not sure how long in between these images, but. So yeah, all of that kind of reproductive strategy basically means that these animals, manta rays, are vulnerable species. Okay, they're what we call case selective, so they're late to mature, about 10 to 15 years until they reach sexual maturity. They then invest a lot of energy into the courtship trains and 12 months gestation period and all that sort of stuff. Only have one pup at a time, and it's between sort of 5 to 7 years between pregnancies. So basically that population of manta rays is really, really, really slow to increase if you're having one pup per female every 5 to 7 years. Because the population is so slow to increase, any pressure like fisheries or anything like that has a really detrimental impact. So they're quite vulnerable. Sadly, there are targeted fisheries around the world. This is one of the major threats to manta rays. And one of the other big threats is bycatch. So either targeted fisheries, fishermen actually going out to hunt specifically for manta ray, or in this case, manta rays just getting caught up in other fisheries, so tuna fisheries if they use big Persean nets, If there's gill nets and stuff like that left out in the ocean, manta rays and devil rays, these are all devil rays, maybe the bottom right is manta, I'm not sure. They are vulnerable to being entangled and caught up in nets. So an example over in Sri Lanka, the tuna fishery relies on either gill nets or long lines to hunt tuna. The issue with gill nets is it entangles lots of mantas and mobula rays and sharks and other stuff. And as a result, there's quite a lot of bycatch of mobulids. Whereas the long line fishing, so lots of hooks on a baited hooks on a really long line, that doesn't catch so many mantas or mobulas, some, but not too many, but it catches a lot more sharks. So it's kind of like, what do we do to fix this situation? If we ban gill nets, everyone will start using long lines and the sharks will be much more impacted. If we ban long lines, the sharks will be better off, but they'll be all using gill nets, and then the mantas and mobulas will be worse off. So it's a really tricky sort of problem to solve. Sri Lankan fisheries in kind of numbers, just to put it in perspective. I was over in Sri Lanka, I think this was last year, and I witnessed this oceanic manta being caught and then sort of cut up and sold. It was quite traumatic. The whole manta was sold by the fishermen for about $300. It was cut up and it weighed about 400 kilos. The meat was sold for 44 cents per kilo. So really, really cheap. There was not much value. All the meat of it was sold for about $180. But the gill plates, they sold for about $120 to $190 per kilo. So that's a really valuable bit of the mobula ray, the manta ray. That's where all the sort of financial benefit is for these fishermen. So essentially what is happening is mantas and devil rays are being caught either accidentally or targeted. The main value of these animals are these gill plates. So it's the sort of section inside each of the 5 gill slits. I think there's maybe, oh, I might remove that photo. Yeah, and those are basically removed, and I'm sure many of you heard of shark fin soup. Very similar sort of idea. So the gill plates are removed from the animal. You're after a really small section. The rest of the animal is almost waste or really, really like not valuable meat at all. Those gill plates are dried out, sent over to Southern Asia, often Hong Kong, Guangzhou in China, areas like that. And it's eaten as a Chinese medicine, basically a pseudo remedy, so a fake cure for diseases and illnesses. So same as shark fin soup, well, it's more of a sort of status symbol. But the gill plates, again, really wasteful, follows a very similar kind of path. It's not in the traditional Chinese medicine practice. So if you look at old literature and stuff, you won't find it in there. It's a much newer kind of industry and being marketed quite heavily. Here the translations are clearing away heat and toxic material, anti-inflammatory, eliminating stasis and to activate blood circulation, all this sort of stuff. It's either eaten in a soup or it's kind of ground up into a tonic and then used in a solution. So that's kind of the sad side of things. Mobula fisheries and bycatch have had huge impacts on populations around the world. Some populations have declined by almost 80%. So really, really impactful on the population. Thankfully, though, there is starting to be a move in the right direction. Manta rays were listed as vulnerable. They've been added to Appendix 2 of the CITES Convention and to CMS. So all these are international kind of trade or conservation agreements between international countries to protect mantas. In Hawaii, mantas have been protected by state law for a number of years. In the Maldives as well since 2014. Indonesia banned fishing as well in 2014. And the main reason for this is basically tourism. Okay, manta ray tourism is hugely profitable for countries. It is, I think it's $8.1 million in revenue every year for the Maldivian government, and it's about $140 million globally. So essentially, manta rays are worth much more alive than they are dead through tourism. So that's a really big incentive for countries to protect them. it's sad that it always comes down to sort of money, and money decides on what gets protected. But then I guess the flip side of it is tourism, like you guys going out diving. If you are going to see manta rays, you're supporting that industry, and adding more weight to the importance of having these animals alive, which is really good. So how can divers help with manta rays and conservation and stuff like that? Tourism is a growing thing, diving with manta rays. Obviously this year tourism is taking a massive hit, but in general, more and more people are diving and snorkeling with manta rays in more and more countries around the world. This does have its issues. Okay, over tourism and unsustainable tourism can be really negative. So if you are going out diving with manta rays, we suggest that you follow our 10-step guide to swimming with mantas, choose a responsible operator, and follow either our code of conduct or relevant rules and regulations in the country. So if we go back to that photo, this guy over here touching the manta, that's something that we sort of ask people not to do. Essentially, we ask people to essentially don't get too close with the boat, then get into the water really slowly, swim over to the animal, but keep about 3 meters, 10 feet from the animal, and then just stay really nice and still in the water, take loads of photos, really enjoy the time. The manta rays will often come really close to you. That's absolutely fine, but then just avoid like touching them. It's always in the back of people's mind, like, ooh, it's so close, I could just touch it. It's just, it's unnecessary. If you scare off that manta, the rest of your dive team won't be very happy with you at all. So following those sorts of code of conducts as a sort of responsible tourist is really, really important. If you are out diving or snorkeling or free diving with manta rays, and you have a camera, doesn't have to be a professional one, just a GoPro or something like that, and you see mantas, if you can grab a photo of the underside of the manta, we can basically ID that and figure out who that manta ray is. We'll tell you, which is always really cool and interesting to know. But that also adds to our database how many mantas are there, how many males and females, and we can track that animal kind of around the country or whatever. So it's really important data. So submitting photo IDs is a great way to support manta ray conservation. Doesn't matter where in the world you are, if you've got photos of this unique spot pattern, please send them in to us, mantatrust.org/ID the manta. And that would be a great help. And other ways to support us, the Manta Trust ourselves, you can join the Cyclone. So our Cyclone is like a members only platform on our website where people can, you donate monthly or annually, and you get access to all this really cool content that we create, which is exclusive to Cyclone members. We run an Adopt a Manta Ray initiative. So you get like a fact file and a kids activity pack, little certificate, really, really nice. Great as a Christmas present, hint, hint. Eat sustainably, okay? Your diet has a really big impact. So if you're eating seafood, make sure that you're choosing sustainably caught seafoods. Lots of really good resources online about eating sustainably, especially with seafood. Spread the knowledge, talk to people about manta rays. So many people around the world have no idea what a manta ray is. So talk to people about it. Or just sort of straight up donations is always really, really appreciated. We are a charity at the end of the day. So obviously this year has been extremely hard for everyone, but we're no exception to that as well. And I think that's about it. That was quite a quick whirlwind through manta ray biology, conservation, and what people can do to get involved. But I hope you learnt a thing or two. And if you've got any questions, please chuck them in the Q&A section.
I actually, what is this? All panels? That was from Carlos. I have some questions for you.
Sure.
So I have a lot of questions actually. And actually, Carlos, if I've been having internet problems, so if I cut out, yell at me, and I'll just come to your computer. So, what manta rays are in the Socorro Island area?
Yeah, so those are oceanic manta rays. So they're the larger of the two species. Mobula birostris is the sort of Latin name. So they're the kind of the giants. And in Socorro, they have black morphs, quite a few black morphs. That photo I showed you of the really, really cool black morph coloration, think that's actually from Socorro. So incredible sight.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I was there in January. So good. Some of the best diving I've done.
We'll be going there in January the 8th of 2022. So we're
Awesome.
excited about that.
Yeah,
Okay,
you should be.
so when we were in the Galapagos, we saw manta rays doing somersaults.
Mm-hmm.
And would that have been reef manta rays?
No, that would have been oceanics as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the Galapagos is a really interesting place. There's not much manta research going on over there. I think most of the diving is either towards areas where they don't really get mantas. Mantas tend to be in a slightly different area to where most of the diving activity happens. And I think it's also a slightly different season to when the mantas happen. So everyone's always after the hammerheads and the huge whale sharks. And I think, right. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the manta season or the areas are slightly different. So we don't really get too much data. So yeah, if anyone's got IDs from Galapagos, that'd be super cool.
It was actually, we did a week on the land base and then we did a week on the liveaboard. And on that land based trip, we did a trip over to Isabela and we went to Los Tonales. And when we were traveling back from Los Tonales, we stopped boats because they were doing their somersaults in that area. So it was right near Isabela. And it was, when we did the liveaboard, we saw tons of hammerheads. Every single dive, there were hammerheads. We saw some whale sharks, saw mola, stuff like that. The mantas weren't anywhere to be seen at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. I have a ton. Nobody's putting questions in the chat. I'm not monopolizing.
Actually, I'm going to interject here. We do. There's a Q&A section. So Alex has submitted one question when you are ready.
I'm ready. Alex's question. As far as documenting mantas, do we know the range a manta may travel over its life cycle, or do they stay in the same general area?
Yeah, really good question. I don't think I touched on that. It varies for the two different species. Reef manta rays, we tend to think of a fair bit more, like a bit closer connection with the reef. So they tend not to swim off across oceans and stuff like that. In the Maldives, huge system of reefs, the largest population of reef mantas. They stay within the Maldives sort of archipelago. With oceanic manta rays, the thinking for some time has been that they're like ocean travelers and they travel like hundreds of kilometers across, thousands of kilometers across oceans and stuff. That theory is starting to change, and people are starting to think that they're much more, they've got much smaller home range. So tagging studies and things like that are starting to sort of paint this picture that they're actually much more, they are swimming like, so from Socorro and to the mainland of Mexico, they're doing that trip, which if you've been out there is sort of 24, 36 hours sailing by boat. So it is a big stretch of ocean, but they're not traveling like across the Pacific Ocean quite so much. They're a bit more, smaller habitat range. But again, it's something that we don't really fully understand.
Okay, this question is from Louise. What is the typical natural lifespan of a manta in the wild, not cut short by people or predation?
Mm-hmm. We think it's about sort of 30, 40, 45 years, maybe tops. Most manta research bases or whatever haven't been studying mantas for 35, 40 years ago, though, which makes things a bit tricky. So some of our oldest sightings are still being, those mantas are still being sighted. Some of them are starting to sort of trail off and we're not seeing those anymore. So we kind of assume that they've died, and then we've got kind of a rough idea of how long it is. But yeah, it'll probably take 10, 15 more years of research until we get like a really more sort of, exact number on it, but probably around 30, 40, 45 years, something like that.
I need to correct that. That was Lewis. Lewis, I don't have my glasses on. So you became Louise. Okay, so Tim Gallagher, is there an effort to get identification photos of dead mantas from markets?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. So we've got a affiliate project in Sri Lanka. It's one of the largest fishing nations of mantas. So we've got a team there that goes to the fish markets, documents how many mantas, male, females, all that sort of stuff, takes photo IDs. The issue is these animals are huge. So when fishermen come across them out in the ocean, they tend to sort of hack them up into pieces and then put them in the hull of the boat on ice and stuff. So then when we get to port, we've then got when they get to port, we've then got sort of 10 halves of mantas to try and puzzle pieces back together and try and get an ID, which doesn't really work. But yeah, if they're landed whole and there is that photo ID available, we can then compare that to the alive population that we've recorded in the area and see if we get a match.
Okay, Jonathan Persky. In the Solomon Islands, there is a dive site called Devil's Highway, which is a manta feeding station, not cleaning station.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of any other manta feeding stations?
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of feeding sites all around the world. They tend not to be quite as sort of like pinpoint accurate, like this is where it's going to happen. But I mean, close to you guys in Kona, the sort of night feeding manta dive off Kona, that's a feeding station. Obviously, it's quite artificial because the mantas are drawn in with the torchlight, which attracts the plankton and then the mantas. Off Isla Mujeres in Mexico, off the Yucatan, where you've got the huge whale shark populations. Manta rays are also feeding around that area, so it's really quite common to come across mantas there. But again, it's huge sort of expansive ocean. And then in the Maldives, there's a site called Hanifaru Bay, which is kind of a horseshoe-shaped bay lagoon kind of thing, just jutting off from the reef system. And that acts as kind of a natural funnel of plankton. And in there, we get the largest aggregations of feeding mantas anywhere in the world. Just pop Hanifaru Bay into YouTube and you'll find loads of videos of hundreds of reef manta rays. I think the most we've recorded as a team was 240, 250 reef manta rays, and that's with photo IDs, so we know that there was that many in the area the size of kind of a football field, and you often get a whale shark or two popping up in there as well. So it's really sort of special place for mantas there. And then there are lots of others, but it really depends on where the currents are pushing the plankton and stuff like that. So then when the currents change, or if the wind's blowing the wrong direction, you might not get feeding mantas.
This is by Oli, and the question is, how do mantas reproduce, which you covered that, but what percentage survive?
That's a really tricky question. We don't have the data for it. We have no idea. We see reproduction like that, mating. So when the male and the female come together and the male inserts claspers into the female, there's like a handful of records of that. So then you would need to follow that female for 12 and a half months, or pick her up again in 12 and a half months. And basically, we've never seen birthing. So then you'd be trying to film the very first birthing to know whether that pup survived. And then in terms of knowing how many survive from birth to adulthood or to, again, reproductive sort of age, again, we have so few records of natural deaths of manta rays because they spend so much time sort of in deeper water and all sorts of different areas. And when the manta dies, they're negatively buoyant. So then they just sink to the bottom of the water. Whereas whales and stuff like that, often they get gas bubbles and stuff, and then they float to the surface, and then scientists can kind of stumble across them. With manta rays, they sink to the bottom, and you never see them. They get scavenged, and sharks and stuff munch them away, and then they're gone. So we have very little data on natural death rate of mantas.
Okay, this right here you answered anyway, but I thought it was funny. It was my question. Is piggybacking really feeding or opportunistic sex? Even though I know the answer to that. So when you're diving in the Socorro and you see the large remoras attached to them, this is Louis again, AKA Louise from before. Are they annoying or painful to the mantas, or are they welcome hitchhikers?
It's hard to say. There's no benefit to the manta ray for having these remoras. They don't get anything from it. And that's one of the theories. So manta rays breach, they jump out the water. Devil rays especially, where like Baja California, La Paz, Cabo San Lucas, Magdalena Bay, that sort of area. You get huge schools of the small mobula rays and they sort of jump out the water. Not so much with that, but with manta rays, they also breach. And one of the theories as to why they do that is to basically dislodge these remoras and parasites and stuff. So if that's the case, then yeah, they're sort of a pest and it's quite annoying and they jump out the water and try and splash and knock them off. If you look at places like Socorro and stuff, where the manta has the two remoras on the sort of shoulder pads, if one of those remoras comes off and is somewhere else, you'll see like it almost looks like someone's worn a boot and basically stamped on the manta's shoulder, and it leaves like it looks like a footprint, and that's where the sort of sucker from the remora has been rasping away on the manta's skin. So you see that sort of leftover patch. Yeah, so thinking about that, I'd say yeah, remoras are pretty pesky. Not much fun.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier about this being in aquariums. I had heard in preparing for this, I grabbed a lot of videos and spliced them up so that I could put them on Instagram. And someone had said that mantas don't tend to live, maybe it was your video, so that they don't live in captivity, that they die very quickly.
I don't know too much about that. Obviously, there will be the data out there because it's really easy to check it every day, see if the manta's still alive. There are a number of aquariums around the world that do have mantas in captivity. And yeah, at least I think it might have been the case like a few 10, 15 years ago that they weren't so well at sort of keeping them alive, but definitely the ones in Japan, they've managed to keep them and they've given birth a couple of times. So yeah, I'm not too sure about that. There's definitely mantas in captivity. I don't know how long they managed to keep them alive for.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't approve of it, but it does offer scientists much more access to collect a lot more data if you can basically look at that manta all day. Sorry, my housemates just set the fire alarm off.
Okay, then very quickly, for Gay Scuba Week, I do not do any trip where being gay is against the law. I follow the International Lesbian and Gay Alliance report on these laws, and I'm not talking about like sodomy laws. I'm talking about where people actually put you in prison. And you had talked about getting the word about. Oh no, you hadn't talked about. You had about countries that are using mantas for tourism, and they aren't allowing the fishing of mantas. Is there a way to get that word out other than, I mean, obviously word of mouth through us, but is that something, in my opinion, referring back to what I do, I think there are so many wonderful places to go where we are welcome, and there's so much to be seen that I think that if people viewed that the same with mantas, then instead of giving our money to countries that don't protect them, we give our money to countries that do, and it would benefit all the way around. So I don't know if that was really a question. Oh, you're muted. Carlos, you muted him. Carlos?
No, sorry, that was me. I muted myself, but then I couldn't unmute. Yeah, it was the alarm was going off. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I fully respect you guys' decision on that. And it is a shame that you can't access these places because of those issues. I think that's real shame. In terms of promoting tourism in areas that don't hunt mantas, that is certainly sort of a valid argument. But we do have to also consider the sort of fisherman side of things. Places like Sri Lanka, I've been there a number of times and I've met with a lot of these fishermen and sort of spoken to them, and they're really nice people. They're really friendly. They want to take selfies with you and stuff. And the manta that I showed with the one that sort of got pulled in, they had to cut it up, but nobody wanted to cut it up because the skin of the manta is really like raspy, and the cutter gets all these like burns and scrapes and stuff, and they don't like it. So they don't really want to be doing that. And then the fishermen, they go out for sort of 10 days, 2 weeks at sea, even longer, on these rickety fishing boats that are not very secure, away from their families and stuff. Dangerous jobs. They don't enjoy it. Like it can be really dangerous. So yeah, to put the sort of the onus on the fishermen and to sort of demonize the fishermen is a dangerous thing. Often these people are in very poor situations where it's their livelihood. They're earning enough money to then come home and to buy food for their family and to school books for their children and stuff. So yeah, it's dangerous to sort of demonize the fishermen in this scenario.
I don't.
They're kind of doing it out of necessity. Instead, we should be looking at what is driving these fisheries. Why is it good for them to catch them? And it's good for them to catch them because they can earn so much money from the gill plate trade. Okay, why is there so much money in that? Because it's being sold in Southeast Asia, in China and Hong Kong and stuff as this fake remedy. There's no medicinal value to these products, but they're being marketed so heavily that it's gonna cure cancer for you. Oh, you're gonna have better sex drive or whatever. It's all sort of made up stuff. And that's where we should be focusing, like, yeah, the negativity and sort of closing down if you stop the demand for it, then people are going to be less interested in catching it, and yeah, the fishermen won't be doing that. So I fully understand sort of we should be promoting tourism in countries that have already protected these animals for sure. But I don't think we should be targeting the fishermen per se.
I don't mean to target them. That wasn't my point. My point wasn't to say don't go here. My point was to say, oh, look at this place, they protect mantas.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
was my point. And something else, a lot of the islands have discovered that by protecting sharks instead of finning them, they make revenue that's a non-ending stream by doing shark dives and stuff like that. So I would think that the best way to go would be to show them the money that they can make from protecting the mantas and teaching them the proper way to, allow people to swim with them, stuff like that. So I have another
100%.
question. I have a question from Tim Gallagher, and we're going to do one more after that, and then we're gonna say thank you. Why do they do wingtip air exposure? I don't know what that means.
I'm guessing you mean like, so when they're banking and the tips of the wings break the surface and like that. I don't think it's I'm not too sure, but I don't think it's purposeful. Often when mantas sort of bank, if they're feeding up near the surface and they bank and they turn, the wingtips will break the surface as they kind of turn. Yeah, other than that, I'm not too sure if that's what you meant. But...
Okay. All right. So Freed, let's see here. Ginger loves this presentation. Let's go up here. Freed. She appreciates your empathy for the fishermen. That's cool. All right. Simon, thank you so very much for spending your time on this Sunday to talk to us, to give us information. I can't thank you enough. This has been a really great experience, and hopefully maybe we can do more. And then I also want to say thank you to everybody that's here. This is the first webinar that I've done, and I just think that in this time with COVID and all of that, that you can't really socially distance on a boat that's small, and I personally don't find diving a safe thing right now. So this at least connects us to the ocean and gives us information and lets us know who you are, and hopefully every one of us can share who you are and get more word out, and maybe adopt a manta or become a Cyclone member. Thank you to Simon and Richard Carlos for putting this together. That's Louis, aka Louis. He's very fun, informative, and helps me to connect with the water that I have not been able to get in for a long time.
Me too.
Everybody's
I haven't
saying
been
thank you. You haven't either, yeah.
for a few months now, and yeah, I'm getting itchy feet.
Yeah, me too. But thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody that has joined in. And there will be another presentation on whales. And all of you who are here will be able to sign up for it in about maybe 35 minutes when I go make it live. So thank you for your time. And you know, hopefully maybe there's something else we can do in the future. Or maybe actually what's kind of cool is if we could do some kind of a dive trip that would help Manta Trust. You know, put
Yeah,
together.
absolutely. We run, we have kind of a sister company called Manta Expeditions. There is on our website as well. Loads of resources on our website, information and stuff. So do check out mantatrust.org. But we have Manta Expeditions, which we run bespoke Manta like citizen science expeditions and stuff all around the world, Indonesia, Maldives, Mexico. We're trying to set up more. Obviously, it's taken a massive hit this year, but yeah, for sure. If you want to try and organize something, we'll bring along one of our Manta experts and they'll do evening presentations and you'll help collect data on mantas and stuff. And
I think that's brilliant. Okay, thank you. Have a great day or evening. It's nighttime there.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for the invitation to come on and talk about mantas.
Thank you. And
Cheers.
thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody else. Stay safe.